That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you. And we are live tonight, a live edition. We don't get a chance to do this very often, but it lined up tonight to work. This is actually when Aaron Leming and I's, schedules meshed. And I said, you know what? Let's do a live show because Aaron Leming, like he does every year, this dates back. We're pushing a decade. I think we're at about 7 or 8 years now, Aaron, where we have been getting together right before the start of the season to do a full Chicago Bears season preview. Love that we're keeping up the tradition and really appreciate you jumping on with me today.
Absolutely, man. I look forward to it every year. This has been about the most optimism we have, and then we get into the season and everything kind of falls apart. So hopefully it'll be different this year, but it's always a pleasure to join you, and it should be fun. This is the most complete roster they've had in quite some time, probably since we've been doing it.
Yeah, I think we can make some arguments 2018, 2019 and those teams there. I know 2019 we had a lot of optimism. We really thought this team was going to build on a great 2018, and we really don't need to revisit that because there is a lot of optimism around the team, and we don't want to remind everyone what can happen. And not that I think this is going to be 2019, because I think we have a better offensive coach and a better quarterback, and that's going to go a long way. So before we get into looking forward and looking at this team and how it's going to perform in the regular season, I want to pick your brain about training camp and preseason, and if there's anything that really stood out to you. I mean, a lot of people talked about Ben Johnson and his attention to detail in practices and the big installs and everything there. And look, preseason was, I know the Bears went 3-0. That's great, yada, yada, yada. But does it really matter? It doesn't, because we saw some really crisp preseason from the ones. And then, we get to, in week 2 and we get to week 3, not so much against Kansas City. So a little inconsistency there, some certain things to build on, and some certain things, if you want to get nervous about Braxton Jones and how he performed in the preseason, you certainly can. So just kind of some overall thoughts, if there's anything that you could actually take away from the preseason games moving forward.
Yeah, I don't know. As far as the preseason games, like you pointed out, they went 4-0 last year, right? I mean, it's one of those things where I don't know that the preseason wins, losses, whatever translates to anything. And I think especially when you're talking about, first year head coach, first year coaching staff with this team, there's just not a whole lot to take away from. I mean, I know that there was a lot of optimism with the Caleb Williams stuff in week 2. And obviously it was nice to see him play on time. It was nice to see him make some throws. But then obviously, last week against Kansas City wasn't very good. So again, I think if anything, you can kind of go back to training camp if you're looking for any takeaways. And really the biggest thing is how physical they were in camp and the type of identity that they wanted to establish, which I think is, if you think about it, especially, the offensive minds that they've hired, this has definitely been a little different. I mean, usually you get an offensive-minded coach and they're focused on the offense, and, the physicality isn't a huge thing. I think with Ben Johnson, because of his time with Dan Campbell, I think that there's a certain identity that they want to have. Obviously, we heard the Dolphins talk about it, and they're still whining about it now, about the physicality of the joint practice that they had, and then the physicality of the joint practice in Buffalo. And it seemed, at least on the other side from the Buffalo, reporters, it seemed like the Bears looked like they belonged. So I think, if anything, I think we know, like, this is a roster with a lot of new starters. This is a team with a lot of new players. This is a brand new coaching staff outside of very select few names. There's a lot of new, and we've seen that can go really well going back to 2018. We've also seen that it can take some time to kind of click. And I think especially with a young quarterback, you hope that they catch on right away, but at the same time, it feels like they're building towards something. It feels like they have an identity. And honestly, for me, it's just nice that Ben Johnson can get in front of a microphone, answer questions, and have some sort of charisma.
Yeah, you know what? Let's actually talk about Ben Johnson's press conferences for a second, and even it trickles down to the other coaches as well. It is a really welcome change, Aaron, listening to these guys talk football. They're honest. They talk about specific goals. I think even listening to guys like Dan Rochar and what he wants to do with each offensive lineman, Ben's will, like, how many times have we heard, and this isn't just Matt Eberflus, it's every coach. Oh, we're working on things and it's just fluff and it's generic and nothing ever really is said. But Ben Johnson's like, you know what? The offense sucked today, and or whatever it might be. Like, he is willing to just say exactly what's on his mind. I'm sure certain things are, they're careful about what they say, but the transparency of this coaching staff is something I can't remember ever seeing in Chicago. Like, maybe there was a little more with Lovie Smith, but I don't think so. I can't remember a coaching staff that's willing to talk to the media and thus the fans like this one is.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think it goes beyond transparency. I think it's authentic, right? I mean, you talk about Dan Rochar and, he's talking about the offensive lineman and he says, yeah, it's like, he talks about Braxton Jones. He said, he had a really good, week of practice. And then, we get into that last practice and the joint practice and we get into the game and he reverted back to whatever it is he's been doing. And it's like, that's the kind of stuff where you've never really heard that before. And again, the same thing with Ben Johnson. They win that preseason game. They basically walk it off with Jade Walker. And again, it's just preseason, whatever. But there was a lot of excitement on the sidelines. 15, 20 minutes later, he gets in front of a mic and you could tell he was frustrated. He was frustrated with the first team defense. He was frustrated with the first team offense. There's a standard that's been kind of a buzzword, but it's true that there's a standard to the way that they want to play. Every single coach, knows that standard. It seems like all the players know it, but there's also a standard within the coaching staff in terms of how they're talking to the media. And they're not just going up there rambling about whatever. And again, this is still the honeymoon phase. They haven't played a game yet. They haven't had to talk after a meaningful loss, whatever the case may be. But it's still really nice to see, especially. I mean, I feel like Matt Nagy was pretty good in the beginning, and then I felt like as things kind of fell apart, he started to kind of fall apart.
Yep.
Matt Eberflus, I mean, just from his opening press conference, man, you're sitting there, it's like, oh my God, this is just rambling over and over.
The fist bump with Ryan Poles.
Yeah, so it's definitely refreshing, at least right now, although I think we can probably both agree that, if they lose or if they whatever, like, there's not really a whole lot that a coach can say where you're just like, okay, I still feel good about this. Like, a loss is a loss. But we'll just have to kind of see. It feels like they're on the right track. And I think that's the most important thing. And having somebody like Ben Johnson, who's willing to go do all these media appearances, who's willing to talk in front of a microphone and not talk in circles or act like everybody else is an idiot, is definitely nice.
Yeah, it's really refreshing. And like you said, I agree with you. I think they are building something. I think that you can actually see a direction and a path they want to go. And I think this might be a bit of a slow start. And I know Ben Johnson owns the Minnesota Vikings. I know Caleb Williams plays really well against the Minnesota Vikings. And that positions them well in week one. It might be a slow start. There still might be mistakes. I mean, I don't know how well this is going to be, how clean this is going to be in week one. We'll get to that towards the end of this podcast. And I also do want to say, if you are listening live, if you want to drop any comments in the YouTube chat, feel free to do that. We are going to do a mailbag at the end of this podcast. So make sure you get them in there. We've got some on Twitter we're going to answer as well. But again, put those in there. So Aaron, let's talk about Ben Johnson. Let's talk about this offense. I think that's what's most exciting. And I was certainly excited for Matt Nagy's offense, and it looked the part in 2018. And like you said, things kind of derailed. And the big thing, like, if we're going to compare those two guys as the offensive gurus, so to speak, they've had in the last decade or so, Matt Nagy could not marry the run and the pass. He could not run the football. And like, with Ben Johnson, running the football is an attitude. It's important. It's part of the offensive game plan. Matt Nagy, it was, I have to run the football because I have to run the football. And that was, if Matt Nagy could throw the ball 65 times a game, that's what he wanted to do. He just knew it didn't work. Ben Johnson is a totally different mentality. His use of play action, his use of motion, making sure that Caleb Williams has quick options to get the ball out quickly, like how he's going to be able to mix and match things. This is really exciting, and we can talk about Ben Johnson, his attention to detail, how he does. We were January was, I don't know if Ben Johnson is a leader of men. I think we've already put that to bed. That's not a concern here. I think for all the excitement and all the hype that Ben Johnson was in January, and we don't know if it's going to result in wins and this year. We don't know where this is going to go yet. But for the first time, like, I was confident in Matt Nagy. I wasn't confident in Tressman. I wasn't confident in Eberflus either. But I am more confident in this than Matt Nagy. I can't remember, the Bears going out and getting a guy like this. The last time the Bears went out and got a coach that was this highly sought of was probably Dave Wanstead. Now, obviously that didn't work out too well. Ben Johnson, in this era of football, I think you just have to be elated that they were able to pull this off, that he's here. And like you said, there's direction. This is going someplace. And Ben Johnson, I think, is going to be here for many, many years.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's funny because it's kind of one of those, like, everybody for the most part wanted Ben Johnson during the hiring cycle. I know we shared the same feeling. I didn't think that the Bears are going to be able to get him. And I think for a lot of the reasons that Bears fans wanted him, he's already kind of delivered on, at least in terms of what we've seen. But then I also think, kind of touching back on what you were talking about earlier, where he's supposed to be this, mad scientist, and he's this guy that locks himself in his office, and he doesn't, he's not very good with the media, and he's not really a leader and all that stuff. I think we've seen that where it's met the expectations and well beyond that, where, just right out of the gate, in his opening press conference, and again, not that opening press conferences mean everything, but it almost felt like a precursor with Matt Eberflus. It almost felt like, at least in terms of year one, it felt like a precursor with Matt Nagy, where he came in, he was super excited, had a lot of energy. You could feel that things were different. Obviously, it didn't work, but there were a lot of reasons behind that. I don't really think it was culture related more than Ryan Pace doubling down on his quarterback mistake and Matt Nagy realizing that Trubisky wasn't the guy. There was just a lot going on. But I think when you're looking at this from Ben Johnson's standpoint and how he's handled things so far, and just from the fact that he's an analytical mind that is going to be aggressive, but he's also old school, right? He values the defense. He went out, and I think this is a big thing that doesn't get talked about enough. He went out and got a guy like Dennis Allen, who is a very, very good defensive mind. But on top of it, he's a failed head coach times two. He's never getting a job again when it comes to.
Great. Yep.
So that's huge. But I think that there's also a level of throwback with Ben Johnson where he looks at it, he says, you need a good run game. Like, we need to value the run game. But we're not going to sit here and say, hey, like, we need to run the ball 25, 30 times a game. Like, we need to have a 55-45 split. He said, like, it is going to matter in the game plan each week what we do. So sometimes they may throw the ball, 40, 45 times. Other times they may have a heavier run attack. So I think that it's just, again, it's going back to all of the things that we saw wrong with these last few coaching staffs, all of the things that we've seen go wrong with offense as a whole in Chicago over the last 3+ decades. And you're finally getting a guy that not only is one of, if not the best offensive mind in football right now, but also seems to understand the smaller things, seems to understand the bigger picture of actually being a head coach, and actually already has an identity. I think that's huge.
Yeah, I really agree. And one last thing on kind of Ben and this structure here, and we'll start getting into the players themselves is, and look, if we look at how we got to this point with Ryan Poles, Ben Johnson, and even Kevin Warren, and with Caleb Williams, everything was done backwards. Nothing was done correctly. And we look back and we kept seeing the same problem with Justin Fields, different regime change from year one to year two. Head coaching change for Mitch Trubisky year one to year two. And now we've done the same thing to Caleb Williams. But I think the big difference here, and again, I haven't talked to Ben Johnson. I don't know this to be 100% true, but I'm pretty damn sure it's true. Matt Nagy took this job because Matt Nagy thought it could work with Mitch Trubisky. He didn't take this job because of Mitch Trubisky. He got a head coaching opportunity, had a young quarterback. He's like, all right, I think I can make this work. And then after, basically September 2019, Matt Nagy knew that this was not going to work, and he didn't know how to fix this situation.
Yeah,
Ben Johnson.
Neither did the GM.
Yeah, neither did the GM. And here comes Nick Foles, Andy Dalton, and a whole giant mess.
Yeah.
But this here, Matt Nagy did not have 10 jobs he could have picked from. Ben Johnson basically could have been hired pretty much anywhere but New England, which I think that was just going to be Mike Vrabel. Ben Johnson could have had any job he wanted. He chose to come to Chicago, and we could sit there and say he's a Cubs fan and he liked Alice Hall and all this stuff. Make no mistake about it. He took this job because he looks at Caleb Williams and says, this is going to be this is going to be Walsh, Montana. This is going to be Jimmy Johnson and Troy Aikman. This is going to be that, head coach and quarterback combo, that elite combo. He thinks he can win with Caleb Williams for 10 to 15 years. And that's why I believe he took this job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's definitely a product of having the number 1 overall pick and somebody that was viewed as highly as Caleb Williams coming out. And like you said, I mean, at this point in time, I think you have to hope that, and we talked about this last year. I mean, we've talked about this countless times just because they've made the mistake. I don't even know how many times. I mean, you're going back to Trubisky and Fox and everything else. And then obviously with Fields and Nagy and then Fields and Eberflus, it seems like the priority has been on the offense, not just a half-hearted attempt, but truly the priority has been on the offense side of the ball. They went out, they got the right head coach in terms of, at least in terms of scheme and everything else, and being able to hold, Caleb Williams accountable. And then you talk about having a head coach and a coaching staff that values the offensive line and that values putting more weapons around him. And that's the other thing. I'm sure we'll get more into the additions, but I mean, this was already a relatively talented offense. I mean, obviously there are a lot of talented offenses in the league. There are a lot of talented offenses in the division. I mean, just look at the NFC North right now. There were a lot of talented players. But I think when you look at it from DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, Cole Kmet, and, even if they would have added just Zacchaeus, I feel like you would have been able to justify, like, this is a pretty solid offense in terms of weapons. But then Ben Johnson goes out of his way to have the influence that he did. And I'm not saying these are his picks specifically, but just in general, they go out and they get a tight end. They go out and they get a receiver that should have been a first-round talent with their first 2 picks. So it's like, on top of the offensive line talent that they added. So it just, there's a lot that feels different. It feels like instead of saying, hey, we made a mistake in year 1, we know we did, so we hired a new coaching staff, and then continue to do things half measured like they have been, it felt like they simply said, hey, like, this isn't good enough. Like, this is simply not good enough. Like, we've got to overhaul the interior of the offensive line. We have to add more weapons that fit with my offense that I want, and really see what works and then go from there. But again, all of the moves that have happened this offseason for the most part have been revolved around Caleb Williams. And I think that's really big because, again, if you go back to, especially with the Fields, like when Nagy was there, obviously they drafted Fields, they were fired after year 1. They should have never hired a defensive coach to begin with, but we kind of talked our way into it because we're like, well, they're getting Luke Getsy. And then you look at that receiver core, the Legion of Zoom in year 1, and it's like, it's such a far cry from what we're seeing right now. And I think that's huge, right? So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. We will see. And like you're talking about Ben Johnson, kind of making this offense in his vision in one off season. Like, the defense hasn't had as much overhaul because the defense was far more functional last year. 13 out of the 25 offensive players on the initial 53 are new. We've only got less than half of the offense is doing that. So that just kind of tells you how much Ben Johnson has changed around Caleb Williams, which gives us a great time to talk about Caleb himself and kind of expectations for this season and where he's at. Because, when we look at Ben Johnson's when we look at Caleb Williams' 2024 season, there are a lot of positives considering it was a dumpster fire around him, 2 head coaches, 3 offensive coordinators, players quitting on the field in front of him. We don't need to rehash everything. And he still threw for about 3,500 yards, 20 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions, had the interception streak, the no interception streak. So there were some positives there, but the advanced numbers with Caleb were abysmal. Bottom of the league level stuff. 6.2, whatever it was, 6.3 yards per attempt. His EPA per play, 31st, whatever it was in the league. So we know that Caleb Williams needs to get more efficient. Ben Johnson knows Caleb Williams needs to get more efficient. He needs to get the football out quicker. So where are you at with Caleb Williams in terms of expectations this year? Because I do think there's going to be growing pains. I don't think we're going to see Caleb Williams throw for 4,500 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 9 picks. I think we're going to see some growing pains. I do think we're going to see big improvement from Caleb, but I do think, if fans are just expecting this to just hit the ground running against Minnesota in week 1 and not look back, I would temper expectations a little bit.
So I've gone back and forth on this, and I do agree with your overarching point that there are going to be growing pains. I mean, even when you go back and you look at some of the quarterbacks in a similar situation to Caleb Williams going into year 2 with a brand new coach, brand new offense, whatever, whether it's Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, like there's a ton of different examples of guys that go in with established good offensive minds that still have struggles, especially in the beginning. So I do think that that's fair. And this is kind of where I've gone back and forth, because I do think, like, solidly, I do believe that he is going to be a 4,000 yard passer this year. And I think that, kind of going back to some of the stuff that you're talking about with EPA, yards per attempt, a lot of the underlying advanced metrics that usually show whether a quarterback was truly good or not, there are a lot of things that I do think that Ben Johnson has focused on that I think are going to help Caleb Williams. And I think when you're looking at EPA especially, I mean, just simply taking 20, 25 less sacks this season is going to drastically help in that department. You go back to the yards per attempt, stuff like that, like scheming guys open, having the easy button, like simply saying, hey, you're going to create this, we're going to create this crosser over the middle that you're going to make a 5 to 7 yard throw, but it's going to be DJ Moore in the open field, and he's going to end up turning this into a 20, 25 yard game. Like, if you look at what Ben Johnson has done offensively in Detroit, a lot of their model for how they're getting yards and how they're scoring points are getting guys in the open field and creating yards after the catch. And I think that that's going to be a big thing. So again, I think when we go back and look at the year, I think the numbers are definitely going to be better. I think that the underlying metrics are going to be a lot better. But I think you're still going to have those people that are going to look at this and say, the same people who praise Jared Goff are then going to turn around and criticize Caleb Williams for taking the easy button, for doing things simply sometimes. And again, even if it goes back to how things looked in week 2 of the preseason, where you're looking at this and sometimes it's just simple, simple three-step drop, get the ball out, whatever that is, whatever the case is, playing on time. A lot of this offense, and this is something that I've even struggled to trust, right? Because we've seen it, we've heard it, we've heard about Matt Nagy being the best head coaching candidate or prospect that Andy Reid's ever had. We heard about Luke Getsy being one of Aaron Rodgers' favorite offensive coaches that he's ever had. There's no way he's going to fail. So I understand the skepticism, and I get caught up on it sometimes too, because it's like these guys will have success elsewhere. They come to Chicago and all of a sudden it doesn't work. But I do think when you look at Ben Johnson's offense, then when you realize that he adapts his scheme to his personnel, not the other way around, the fact that he's able to make things as easy as possible. I mean, just thinking about, like, we all regard Sean McVay is one of the best offensive minds and one of the best head coaches in the league, right? Yet somehow Ben Johnson took a quarterback whose confidence was completely destroyed, right? He was a throw-in on a trade. They can say whatever the hell they want. He was a throw-in. Jared Goff was a throw-in on a trade. And Jared Goff has had the best stretch in his career. He is a legitimate top 10 quarterback, not under Sean McVay, but under Ben Johnson, because they adapted the offense to what he did well, and they were able to work because he understands the offense at a higher level than just simply, I'm a passing game coordinator, I know how to throw the ball. He values the run. He values the deception. He values the aggression. He values the putting the confidence in his players to make the plays. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, I do have relatively high expectations for Caleb Williams. I think that he should smash the majority of quarterback records for Chicago.
I agree with that.
Yeah. But I do think that there are going to be some bumps along the road. And I think that it's tough being a Bears fan. It's tough being in the city of Chicago. It's tough having Caleb Williams as your quarterback because it's all so polarizing. It's not Caleb Williams' fault. It's not the Bears' fault, but it's just a polarizing thing. whatever Caleb Williams does, whatever this offense does, it's going to be put under a microscope. People are going to overreact one way or the other. We saw it in week 2 of the preseason. We've seen it this week. The Jason McIntyre thing, filling in for Colin Coward. Like, what is going on? Like, but that is going to be all year. So I think more than anything, Bears fans have to have a level head and understand there is a lot more eyes on them than any normal situation would be.
Yeah, there is absolutely going to be a microscope. Caleb Williams is going to be broken down on NFL Live by Dan Orlovsky every Monday. Like, this is what's going to be happening. So, and where if we look at these other quarterbacks with like Mitch and Justin Fields, and all of them had multiple flaws. But if someone said to say, give me the one reason why these guys failed, for me, for Mitch Trubisky, it was his inability to whiteboard a zone defense. Basically, he didn't know exactly where defenses, what they were going to do and where he should put the ball. For Justin Fields, yes, he held on to the ball too long. He didn't process quick enough, but he really had zero ability to throw with anticipation. He did not know when guys were open, and that means he constantly missed them. Caleb Williams last year, to me, it was this. I think he can read a defense. I think he can throw with anticipation. It's the processing speed in terms of having to go through all that and do all that. And I think Ben Johnson's going to help him with that a lot, especially like you talked about with making sure the easy button is there and things like that. But do you think, if I am accurate and at Caleb Williams, it's the speed right now that has to get picked up, do you think that's something that can be improved upon from year 1 to year 2 and moving forward? Because to me, I think Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson can be very successful together if Caleb Williams' processing speed never picks up, because I think Ben Johnson is that good and Caleb Williams is still that talented. But I think getting that speed, that processing speed quicker, is going to be the difference of Caleb Williams being a borderline top 10 quarterback and Caleb Williams being a borderline top 5 quarterback.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I mean, I think especially in today's NFL, the processing speed has to be there. And I think if you go back to it, and it's kind of it's a different way of thinking about it. But I think if you go back to 2022, it was Caleb's first year at USC. When he's playing, I guess this is my thing. When he's playing with confidence and when he trusts what he sees, he processes a lot faster. And I think that, kind of going back to what you were talking about, there's a lot of damage that has to be reversed from last year. And I think that we've seen the remnants of that even through training camp and the preseason so far, where he's got to play with the confidence that he had at USC. And I think that's really, or even at Oklahoma, but really at USC where everybody saw it, like, that's who he has to be. That's the quarterback that he has to be. And I think that once he starts trusting what he's seeing consistently, I think that he will start playing faster. Now, with that being said, there's our good buddy, Stark Kyle Orton was the first one to really point this out to us last year, when we're talking to him. And there is a trend with Lincoln Riley quarterbacks, going back to Baker Mayfield, going back to Kyler Murray, going back to basically anybody that Lincoln Riley's ever have. Like, their time to throw in year 1, their inability to get rid of the ball in year 1, versus like year 3 is drastically different. Once they get into the NFL, they're finally able to kind of have that structure coached out of them. And like you said, I think, yes, Ben Johnson can adjust, but I think that even with as good of an offensive mind that he is, Caleb Williams still has to play on time. This is a timing offense. Like, he's still going to, in order for them to reach the heights that they want to reach, he's still going to have to play on time. He's still going to have to trust the offense. He's still going to have to trust his eyes. So, yeah, I think that there's definitely a level to it. Can it work if he doesn't really improve? Probably. But I think in order for us to, essentially see the fruits of labor of them going out and getting Ben Johnson and all this hype that has surrounded him since the hire, there's a lot on Caleb Williams too that he's going to have to figure out. But again, talking about the easy button, even with the coaches, like, they have dumped a lot on him during training camp. They've dumped a lot on him with his installs. They've dumped a lot on him, whatever the case may be. Now they're pairing back. So now we're going to get to see, hey, this should be a top 10 interior offensive line. So and that was one of his main issues in college too, is if he had interior pressure, which is just the case for a lot of young quarterbacks. But again, if you can get that resolved, if you can truly fix all of that, if you can get receivers and scheme them open, and you can have guys that are consistently winning on routes, which they have, plus 2 tight ends who are great safety blankets over the middle, plus a guy like DeAndre Swift, who really is a good pass catcher. There are so many outs to where Caleb Williams is just going to have to learn to trust the structure of the offense. And I think he can do it. But I think that in order for this offense to be as good as it's going to be, he's going to have to trust it. He's going to have to learn how to do that.
Yeah, and I think he will learn to trust his protection, and we'll get to that offensive line here in a second. So let's start kind of going through these position groups and what you think. Let's just do a brief minute on the quarterback room outside of Caleb Williams, because, as the 53-man roster comes out and people are trying to figure out who they're going to cut and how they're going to maneuver things, my timeline gets flooded with, well, they got to cut Case Keenum. He's done his job here. He's done. And, when they got Bagent, they don't need Keenum. And that frustrates me, because I think Case Keenum is basically the assistant quarterback coach. I think he is there to bring his presence for the entire season. I know a lot of Bears fans love Tyson Bagent, excited for Bagent that he got that contract. He's going to be here for a few years. To me, I'm happy with Tyson Bagent as the backup. He's a functional backup. He's a guy who I think can come in and, if Caleb Williams is going to miss 4 games, he can go 2-2 in those games and the season won't sink. And I think that's great. And that's a tip of the cap, which I don't do too often to Ryan Poles, that you find a quarterback like that as a UDFA. So I know some Bears fans get carried away and, Bagent's a starter. He's top 20 quarterback in the league, all this kind of stuff. To me, Keenum as basically a QB3 quarterback coach and Bagent as a functional backup is a great spot for this room to be in.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Case Keenum was never brought in with the thought of, if Caleb Williams goes down long term, that he's going to be the answer. Like they needed another adult in the room, and that's exactly what they have. And the coaching staff has talked about this. As far as Bagent goes, extremely, extremely happy for him that he got the contract extension. My biggest issue with Bagent has never been him. It's always been the discourse around whether it was Justin Fields and now Caleb Williams. Like, we can't just accept that we have a more than competent backup. We have to push a narrative that he's somehow going to steal a job or whatever the case may be. So, but no, I think Ben Johnson is being truthful when he says that this is one of, if not the best quarterback room that he's had as a head coach, or not head coach, as a coach as a whole.
Yeah, no, I would believe that, because there were not a lot of great Hendon Hookers on a practice squad. I think Carolina's now. So that tells you what you need to know about Detroit's the Detroit Lions quarterback room behind Goff. So let's clump wide receivers and tight ends together here, Aaron, and just kind of look at this as a weapons room for Caleb Williams. And to me, this room is exciting. I think Devin Duvernay is going to find his way back to this roster. I think that was a procedural move, but I also don't think he's going to be too involved in this offense. They've got the top 4 wide receivers. They've got the top 2 tight ends. Those 6 guys, I think we're going to see often. And maybe there have been times where the weapons were more top heavy, like with Brandon Marshall and Matt Forte. We'll get to running backs here in a second, but the depth of this room, having 6 quality weapons, and like you mentioned, DeAndre Swift, this is remarkable what they've built here over the last 2 seasons. And it's exciting. And look, we don't know if Rome Odunze is going to reach his full potential. We don't know what Luther Burden's going to be. Saw some exciting plays with him in the preseason. But the potential of what this room could be, even this season, is the kind of stuff where you sit there and go, and we're going to talk about the offensive line after this, like, the pieces are in place. Every piece is in place for this offense to be successful. And I'm excited to see what these guys can do in Ben Johnson's offense.
Well, and I think kind of going back to something that Ben Johnson's talked about a few times too, is having, these players and these talents be multiple. They can play multiple different positions. I mean, DJ Moore has been taking snaps out of the backfield. Like, he's been lining up as Z. He's been lining up as X. You can use him in the slot. Like, and again, like, obviously Odunze, you can use him as a big slot as well. And it's funny because despite the training camp that he had and the flash in preseason that he had, a lot of people are really overlooking Zacchaeus. And it's funny because Zacchaeus is one of those guys, like, every successful offense has one of those guys that's just super reliable. Like, he's your third down guy. He's the guy that isn't going to drop the ball, that's always going to run the right route. Every now and then he's going to have the occasional big play, but for the most part, he's just going to be reliable. He's almost going to be like a supersized Earl Bennett, right? Earl Bennett was always that guy for Jay Cutler, where he's just reliable. Like he was always, you could always rely on him to get the third down. And I think that that's huge in this offense, especially, like we look at these depth charts, right? And we look at the full potential of the roster. Well, not really focusing on the fact that there are going to be injuries throughout the year. I mean, we saw it last year too, with the receiver core at times, or, tight end, or whatever the case may be. Like having the depth, having the guys that can all play multiple spots at receiver. You have a guy in Colston Loveland who you can line up out wide and he can play that Rome Odunze type role, or you can have him as an inline tight end and he's a good enough blocker to be able to block. So I think that having, like you said, you've got 6 guys there at receiver or tight end that you can essentially rely on. And obviously not everybody's going to be healthy from week to week, but going back to what Ben Johnson talked about having these guys, play multiple positions and have multiple skill sets, and how the game plan for each week is going to be different. Sometimes they may run the ball 35 times. Other times they may throw the ball 45 times. So it's like you start looking at it from that perspective. And it's like if you have Rome Odunze living up to expectations, if you have DJ Moore, fitting that kind of do everything in the offense, you have Zacchaeus, you have Burden, who could do different things. And then sometimes they're going to be playing a lot of 12 personnel, and all of a sudden it's like you've got 2 tight ends on the field that you're going to have to account for at all times. I just think that there's so many different ways that this offense can go where, again, there's a reason going back to Detroit, when you look at what they did in Detroit, why they were never really stumped. It's because they had the personnel to have multiple different game plans each week and be able to attack defenses in ways that they weren't able to stop it. And I think it's going to be a very similar type of thing in Chicago, obviously, if it all works out.
Yeah, and here's and you were kind of mentioning it there a little bit with the versatility and with this depth. I mean, they can go empty backfield and have 5 great weapons split outside. They can run 10 personnel with 4 wideouts, 11, the traditional 3 wideouts, or 12 with 2 tight ends. Any of those, like as long as they stay healthy with the 4 receivers they have and the 2 tight ends they have, they can do some really remarkable things. And I think that's where we're going to see Ben Johnson really excel. And if you're a fantasy football player, it may be other than running back, because DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai may be really the only guys seeing the ball in the backfield. But it may be that they don't have a 1,000-yard receiver. It may be that DJ Moore is 850 yards, Rome's 800 yards, Zacchaeus and Burden are 600 yards, Komet's 400 yards, Loveland 600 yards. They may just have so many guys involved, because I think we're going to see Ben Johnson throw a lot of different looks at defenses every week because he has the depth of the personnel to do so.
Well, I mean, and you also, I guess the other thing about this too is coming from the same division, he's got 6 teams on the schedule per year. Well, I guess 3 teams, 6 games is more of what I meant to say there, where he already knows these teams inside and out. Obviously, he was with Detroit. He played Green Bay twice a year. So in the same thing with Minnesota. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you're right. I mean, he already knows how to attack these teams, so I there's a lot to be excited about with the weaponry. And like you said, and it's funny because I went through and kind of did a little bit of a study on Ben Johnson's personnel usage and just kind of like overall numbers and stuff like that. And it's definitely interesting because, obviously assuming everybody stays healthy, like there is going to be a defined number 1, a defined number 2 receiver, and then there's going to be that defined tight end 1, defined tight end 2, and defined tight end 3. That was kind of the thing that I learned, is that assuming that everybody stays healthy, like you're going to have guys that are going to be out on the field more. I think when it's all said and done, I think we're going to be looking at Loveland probably playing right around 75% of the snaps. But even then, like in the Brock Wright role in Detroit, like there's still a way that Cole Kmet could end up playing 55 to 60% of the snaps too. And that's kind of where I think people, sometimes they lock in a little bit too much, is like, even if these guys have roles, like there's still, everybody's going to get a chance to touch the ball. And that's something that Ben Johnson's talked about. This entire offensive staff has talked about, like, yeah, we've kind of put ourselves in a little bit of a pickle where it may look cool on a depth chart, but like, we know that we have 6 guys, 6 skill position guys on the offensive side of the ball that are going to want the ball 5 to 10 times a game. So it's our job to figure out how we're going to do that from a week to week standpoint, which is going back to the whole, game planning, figuring out how to attack each defense is going to be very interesting, because I think sometimes you're going to see, Colson Leveland heavy games. Sometimes you're going to see, DJ Moore be the number one guy. Sometimes you're going to see Roma Dunze going to be the number one guy. And I think as the season progresses, I think that Luther Burden, assuming that he continues to develop, and go down the right path, I think that you're going to start seeing him be a larger part of the offense. And then again, like I said, Zacchaeus may have the random 150-yard game 2 or 3 times a year too. I mean, they just have so many different options. Again, with the asterisks of saying, as long as everybody's healthy.
Yeah, obviously that is a key point. So let's move over to the offensive line. And look, the bottom line here is, and we'll talk about left tackle here second. Let's just kind of talk about the group overall. Going into last season, before week 1, Braxton Jones was probably this team's best offensive lineman, with Darnell Wright, developing and was going to pass him that season. But week 1 a year ago, Braxton Jones was this team's best offensive lineman. Fast forward 1 year later, Braxton Jones is this team's worst starting offensive lineman, with Darnell Wright's development. And I'd like to see that a little more. I'd like to see a little more growth there than he's had, but he is a good offensive lineman. And of course, the 3 guys they put in the middle, led by Joe Thuney, who I still don't think gets enough credit for how big he's going to be to this offensive line. He is such a good football player. I think it's a remarkable job that Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles did this season, upgrading those 3 interior positions to the point. And I've been able to talk to some quarterbacks over the years, and they all tell me the same thing. If you don't trust the offensive line in front of you, if you don't trust your protection, it doesn't matter how good you are. You're basically screwed. So when we're looking at Caleb Williams, and we saw the happy feet in some of I think Caleb tried to trust the protection early on, and he got pummeled in the Houston Texans game and things like that. And by the end of the season, that happy feet and the, bailing out a little early, that kind of stuff started happening more than it was at the beginning of the year. And I think that kind of happened over time. I think just having this significantly better offensive line, like I said, we'll talk about left tackle here in a second. I think this unit as a whole, I think it's definitely a top half unit in the league. I think you can argue it's top 10. And if they stay healthy, because I think depth is an issue, if they stay healthy largely this year, this unit could develop into a top 5 unit in the league.
Yeah. I definitely think the ceiling has been the floor has been considerably raised just simply by the 3 guys that they added on the interior. I've still got questions about both tackles at this point in time. I feel like and again, we haven't even gotten the season, so we'll have to see how that goes. But I would have liked to see more reports of Darnell Wright really dominating in camp, and we really didn't get that. And then obviously going back to the coaches being honest, Dan Rouchar said, there's some focus issues, like he fatigues and and then his focus kind of falls apart. So, but I think from the interior aspect, it's like the Jonah Jackson thing made all the sense in the world. And I feel like there's almost this level of like people are undervaluing him because of the random contract extension that he had and the fact that he's probably making a little bit more money than he should. But it's like, this is somebody that Ben Johnson handpicked. Like, he trusts him at right guard. And then again, you start talking about left tackle. I'm sure we'll dive more into it, but it's like, what better way to help insulate your left tackle situation, regardless of who that is, whether it's Braxton Jones past these first few games of the season, whatever the case may be, than to have an all-pro, one of the best offensive linemen in all of football on the inside of you. It's just, there's so much. And again, kind of going back to the quarterback situation, having a center like Drew Dahlman is going to be huge for him being able to trust the calls that he's making, the leadership on that offensive line, the comfort level from Caleb Williams, all the pre-snap stuff. Like, there's a whole nother level to all that as well. So yeah, I think the interior of the offensive line, especially with a quarterback like Caleb Williams, who struggles the most with pressure on the interior, I think it's absolutely huge. Frankly, if we're honest, even if they're a top 12 unit in the league as a whole this year, that's a huge improvement over anything that we've seen in basically since the Matt Nagy era.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you're saying there. And let's talk about left tackle for a second. And I think there's absolutely reason to be concerned. I think, Braxton Jones, maybe better than he's looked right now, because maybe Dan Rochar is having him do some things with technique. We can see, if you watch the practice videos when he's in shorts, his legs are not as thick as they were last year. He does not have as much strength. That's playing into that he needs to build that strength up and honestly quickly here as the season starts. But the one thing I have more hope for, because the frustrating thing we saw a lot recently was offensive linemen getting left out to dry because they just didn't have things schemed properly. They didn't have tight ends chipping. They didn't have running backs coming over and helping, all the things you can do to help out offensive linemen. The Bears rarely did it the last couple of years. We don't need to get into Matt Nagy's Cleveland Browns disaster with Justin Fields. This has just been a consistent thing we've seen through multiple coaching staffs. I have confidence in Ben Johnson and Dan Rochar that that's not going to be the case. Like if they have legitimate concerns that Braxton Jones going up against Jonathan Grenard or whatever is going to be a problem in week 1, I think we're going to see help over there. We're going to, Joe Thuney, like you said, being next to that player is going to be a huge help. So I have concerns about Braxton Jones. I think he's going to be better than we've seen. I guess my fingers are crossed. He's going to be better than we've seen, but I at least have confidence that the coaching staff will be able to recognize that and do some things to help him as he tries to get his feet back under him from this injury, which clearly is still a problem.
Well, and let me ask you something. Okay, so how many times have we seen the Bears go against the Packers when the Packers have all sorts of offensive line injuries, all sorts of offensive line issues? What's the first thing that they do? What's the first thing that Matt LaFleur has done over the years, even with Aaron Rodgers when he gets banged up? Quick passing game. That's
True.
something that we haven't seen from any of the last, even Nagy, it's like, dude, run a slant, man. Like, do something. Like, what is going on? And I think that that's something, again, going back to the coaching, like, you're going to be able to help with the chips. Even going back to the Kansas City game, like, you can see tight ends chipping. You can see just the different assignments from the interior offensive linemen to have the double teams on the edge. So I think that coaching is going to be a huge thing. So my issue with left tackle, obviously, I'm concerned with Jones starting out the year. I still find it kind of comical that it's like he's coming off of a pretty serious broken ankle, broken leg. And one of the first things that Ben Johnson ever said about him was, we like him, but he needs to add strength to his lower half. Like he needs to have a better anchor. And it's like, okay, but you're talking about a guy that may or may not be ready for training camp, and he's already going to be struggling to get back to the form that he had before, and you're wanting him to get even heavier and add even more weight and strength. So it's funny to think about. But for me, this kind of comes down to more of like they bailed out on Ozzie pretty quickly at left tackle, right? Karan Amagaji, I think the only reason he's on this roster right now, and that's not really an indictment on his play during the preseason, I think the only reason he's on the roster right now is because he's a 3rd-round pick from last year. I think that if not, they'd probably be carrying 9 linemen, and it'd be what it is. The fact that they're left tackle and waiting, or because I wouldn't even call it a swing tackle. It feels like they have a backup left tackle and they have a backup right tackle, and that
Agreed.
Backup right tackle is Ozzie Trapello, and the backup left tackle is Theo Benedet. And it's like, for as impressive as Benedet has been, he's still an undrafted free agent for one, and two, he's still got, his arms are like just slightly over 32 inches long. With all that discourse about Will Campbell, come on, that's an issue. So my bigger focus, I think that they can figure it out. I think that they can scheme around it in the beginning of the year until they kind of figure things out. What's the long-term approach going to be here? Because again, you sunk a 3rd-round pick, last year's draft. You sunk a 2nd-round pick into Ozzie Trapello, who maybe they try him again at left tackle, next year. But you sunk a pick into a guy that had the build and had the experience primarily at right tackle, and you tried to make him a left tackle, and you bailed on that pretty quickly because you said he had a rookie wall. I have bigger concerns there, because if you spend 2 day 2 picks like that, and you have a guy like Theo Benedet who emerges as one of those options, there shouldn't be that many questions, moving past 2025 and beyond. And again, I know that's, we haven't even got to the season yet, but when you start looking at how are you going to build on the success, whatever success you have this year, left tackles is going to be one of those situations where it's like, as of right now, you have no answers beyond a banged up Braxton Jones. Like it's that to me is a little concerning.
Yeah, look, and it's concerning, and looking forward, yeah, there are concerns because you sit there and go, what's the plan next year, assuming Braxton Jones is gone? Is Darnell Wright going to swing over to the left side and you have Ozzie Trapillo start? Are you just going to keep Wright there? You draft a left tackle in round one. We're going to see what they decide to do. Look, this is a new coaching staff. There's no guarantee. We're assuming Darnell Wright probably gets a second, contract here, but he may not. There's going to be a lot. There's going to be some surprising overhaul over the next couple of years as Ben Johnson continues to put this offense in his vision, which to me is the running back room, which I do not think is in Ben Johnson's vision right now. I think it's kind of just what it needs to be. Little odd choice right now. They've only got 3 active running backs. They do have Britton Brown on the practice squad. If they don't do any other running back moves, you would assume he's going to be elevated to the active squad in week 1. But it's a thin room, Aaron. Not a lot of, Monangai didn't get a lot because he got hurt, and Roshan's been hurt. He's always hurt. DeAndre Swift seems to be pretty functional in this offense, but there's not a lot behind him right now. That's my concern, is this running back room, especially if guys start getting dinged up a little bit. I trust Ben Johnson's running scheme, that it's going to be functional because of the way the team's going to block and how he's going to call the games. But I think we're going to see a completely different running back room here in 2026, and it's just going to be kind of what it is in 2025.
Yeah, and I think that there's kind of a historical marker to go back to, and that's Ben Johnson's first year as offensive coordinator in Detroit, with Jamal Adams and DeAndre Swift. And so, yeah, I think that there's at least, and again, maybe this is just kind of, the preseason hope, post-draft hope, whatever, but there does seem to be some genuine optimism surrounding Kyle Monangai. And obviously he's just a 7th round pick, whatever. We've seen late round pick running backs be successful, maybe as a part of a 1-2 punch and not as a featured back, but I think it can happen. I thought it was very notable, and I don't know what your thoughts were on it, but I thought it was very notable when Ryan Poles was talking yesterday. He was talking about the running back room and the running back room getting healthy. There's not a single mention of Roshan Johnson in terms of like the optimism, whatever. It was all focused on, DeAndre Swift had a really good camp. He's running north to south instead of east to west. Like, he's lowering his pads. Like, we feel really good about him. And then there's Kyle Monangai, who is a really physical guy, has really good vision, but there was nothing, like there was the 1-2, but there was nothing about Roshan Johnson, nothing about any other options. And then obviously, with the claims come out today, like they didn't make a move. Like, they got 4 running backs. They didn't even bring Ian Wheeler back, which I thought was kind of interesting. But to me, it feels like, I think even the Bears know, like Roshan Johnson, everybody had high expectations for him coming out. The guy can't stay on the field, man. It's just as easy as that. Whether it's concussions, whether it's other injuries, like he can't stay on the field, and you can't build a reliable running game around a guy that can't stay on the field. And I think that's just kind of where it's at right now.
Yeah, and look, Roshan Johnson may not still remain on this team. We may see something happen as the season progresses. It wouldn't even shock me. I think you're right. I think it's Swift and Monangai 1-2. I think that's pretty clear that that's the situation it's going to be when Travis Homer gets back. It wouldn't even shock me if he was RB3, because he can pass block. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. I know he's a special teams guy, but he may get moves, chances over Roshan Johnson, because I think this, like you said, he's not on the field. We know how important the best ability being availability is in the NFL. And Roshan, just an unfortunate situation with him, because I had huge expectations for him. I love that draft choice, but it is what it is. So we've spent a lot of times on offense, as I knew we would. Let's get over to the defensive side of the ball. Before we talk about the players, let's talk about Dennis Allen a little bit. The defense here so far in the preseason, I don't think we can really spend too much time trying to decipher anything about Dennis Allen. We know who Dennis Allen is. You talked about him a little bit at the start of the podcast, being he's been a failed head coach twice, which will help Ben Johnson in terms of leadership, but also Dennis Allen, if this really works with Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams, Dennis Allen has the chance to be kind of the Steve Spagnuolo here and be the defensive coordinator for many, many years, because Steve Spagnuolo failed twice as a head coach, and nobody's interested in him in that position anymore. That kind of stuff gives you a great opportunity to have continuity on both sides of the football, something we always talk about the Bears needing to have, and always having that opportunity to not be there. But I think it's here now. I think Dennis Allen has his work cut out for him in terms of how he's going to have to generate some pressures here. We're going to talk about the defense up front here as we move forward here the next 20 minutes or so. But Dennis Allen as a hire itself and what he's going to bring, kind of an aggressive mentality more so than we saw with Eberflus, who like to sit in zones, things like that. I think the Bears fans are going to really enjoy watching Dennis Allen's defense go.
Yeah, well, I think that especially with how they have obviously defensive tackles, looking pretty good, and we'll get into all that. But I think, I think the biggest issue right now is, do they have enough of a pass rush? And I think that is going to be answered in how creative Dennis Allen is, with his scheme and blitzing and just making exotic looks and everything else. So I don't know how you don't feel good about this pairing overall. I mean, because that was kind of one of the questions too, kind of going back to, the Ben Johnson hire and, when that was all kind of playing its way out, is like, who's going to be his defensive coordinator? And we're, a lot of people are looking at, Detroit and, who could he bring with him? Obviously it wouldn't be Aaron Glenn. And then out of nowhere, it's like the Bears make the hire. And then all of a sudden Dennis Allen's, the primary target. So yeah, there's a ton of value in that. With that being said, I think the only thing that kind of drives me a little crazy, again, kind of going back to what it was with Eberflus, is there's a value put on the defensive line, but there's also not a huge value put on like elite pass rushers. It's more of like size and relying on scheme than it is name value. And I don't know, man. There's still a few names out there I really wish the Bears would go after, but who knows? Maybe we get into the regular season, they get in that pressure on the quarterback, their secondary should be good enough, and this isn't an issue. But until we kind of see how the horses up front run, it's going to be a little hard to kind of diagnose what this defense is really going to look like in year one.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the defensive line here in a second. I'm actually going to lump the back seven together here and get your thoughts on them at first, because I don't have too much to say about the linebacker room. It's fine. There's, it's overpaid, but that's okay. I wouldn't have extended TJ Edwards. We don't need to get in all these things. But Edwards and Edmonds are fine as a linebacker duo. If one of them gets hurt, I don't have a lot of trust in Sewell stepping in, but it's okay there. I think the starting secondary, the starting five back there is outstanding. I think it's some of the best in the league. Have concerns about the depth there. I'm not a huge fan of Elijah Hicks. I know they got Jonathan Owens there as well. The Terrell Smith injury, I do think hurts. I think he was a great backup outside corner to have. I know they brought in Jalen Jones here. We'll see if he's, makes that room a little better. I do like Josh Blackwell as a backup nickel, but if Jalen Johnson is not a guy that stays healthy, I don't know if they'd move Kyler Gordon out there if Johnson got hurt and put Blackwell at nickel. Maybe they try some different things, because that's where I'm at with this back seven, Aaron, is I think it's a really functional starting unit. But if you have to start seeing significant snaps for the guys behind him, I think you're going to see warts in a hurry.
Yeah, well, I think that's fair. I mean, yeah, the linebacker room is definitely, there's a lot of questions there, which is crazy because of the amount of money that they've invested in that group. I don't know, man. The Hippolyte pick still made no sense to me. I like just kind of watching him in preseason. Like, it's clear that he's fast. It's clear that when he, in my opinion, guesses right, that he's able to, be a hard hitter and make plays. But from an instinctual standpoint, which I value a lot, linebackers, I just don't really see it with him. And I think it's funny because Noah Sewell is kind of like the exact opposite. Like, I see a lot of instincts with him, but the physical tools, especially in coverage, are just not really there. So it's going to be very interesting, because I mean, as we're recording this, as we're doing this, like TJ Edwards got hurt yesterday and didn't practice today. So obviously, we don't really know. Like, I don't think it's going to be anything long term, because I feel like something would have probably come out about that. But it's still kind of worth wondering. Like, even if you're going to have two linebackers on the field for 80 to 85% of the snaps, it's like, if one of those guys goes down, how much do you trust Noah Sewell to play Mike linebacker? How much do you? Yeah, exactly. How much do you trust Hippolyte to be in any starting position? Yeah, that's the thing. So, yeah, and again, kind of the same thing with left tackle, right? Talking about the future beyond 2025, there's a lot of questions there because they don't have a single name under contract moving past this year. And I don't know. I mean, Kevin Byers getting up there in age, Jaquan Brisker, obviously health. You talked about another guy who got hurt at practice today and left early. So there's a lot of questions at safety too, not only this year in terms of how high the ceiling can be, but just moving forward, like what's the plan there? And then obviously corner, I think everybody's most interested, at least me. I mean, I'm most interested in seeing, can Tyreek Stevenson kind of bounce back? Because for as good of a story as Nahshon Wright has been during, camp and part of the preseason. I think that what we saw against Kansas City,
that was rough.
It was still kind of who he is. There's a reason he's been with multiple teams in a short career. So I don't know, man. It's a lot of teams don't have a ton of depth. Like, I'm not knocking this team. If anything, I think their secondary is probably the biggest strength that they have on the defensive side of the ball. But with that being said, they've got to stay healthy, and some things have got to go right, because they're going to be using a lot of defensive backs as a whole this year, whether it's nickel or dime packages.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think we're going to see, and look, the Bears aren't going to have a ton of money, but free agency and in the draft, I think you're going to see a lot of back seven investment in terms of that, because TJ Edwards got the extension. I'd be shocked if Tremaine Edmonds wasn't released at $18 million a year. Like we talked about, Sewell and Hippolyte behind them. Can you trust them? No safeties are under contract for 2026. I think we're going to see, maybe they bring back Kevin Byard on a 1-year deal kind of thing and try and find a safety in the draft. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to approach it, but they've got a lot of work to do in terms of safety and linebacker in 2026, but not something we need to worry about right now. So let's move over to the defensive line, because I think that's what's interesting, is you see what should be a potential real strength in terms of that interior defensive line, even going all the way back to Chris Williams being their 5th defensive lineman. That's a really good 5th defensive lineman. Shamar Turner there, it's the 4th guy. Billings rotating in behind Dexter and Jarrett. Really could be a strong unit, and you've got the depth where you don't have to play any of these guys 75% of the snaps where they've got no legs in the 4th quarter. They're going to be able to rotate these guys in a lot. So while I'm really excited about the interior defensive line, I think this edge room is an absolute disaster. I have more faith in the running back room, which there isn't even one right now. There's only one healthy back, than I do this edge room. Montez Sweat, I think, is good. I don't think he's great. I don't think the Montez Sweat we saw in the back half of his first season here is really who he is. I think he's better than he was last year, but I don't think that's who we're going to see week in and week out. Maybe I'm wrong. I didn't like the Dio signing, and I know it's just preseason. I'm not going to put too much stock into it, but Josh Simmons, absolutely, rookie left tackle Josh Simmons, absolutely dominated him against the Chiefs game. You saw Dio doing spin moves, just moving in place. Josh Simmons had him completely controlled. Little concerning there. And Austin Booker, we'll see if he can become that edge they need, that situational edge. And, cross your fingers there, because behind him, I think none of those guys should be on NFL rosters. So I think they're not top heavy. They don't have depth there. I think edge is going to be a major problem. I just don't see the Bears. Maybe Sweat can do it a little bit. I don't see the Bears getting a lot of pressure from the outside. And there's only so much pressure you can get on the inside.
Yeah. I mean, and that's where I'm at mentally, is it feels like Allen's going to have to get extremely creative with how he's creating pressure. And I don't think it's going to be winning with the front four a lot of the time. And like you said, I mean, going back to the whole Dio signing, I talked to, somebody who's covered the Colts for a while, and that I legitimately trust his opinion. And he basically said, he's a solid player. Like, he's somebody that you could flex inside, on late down situations, but he's not a great pass rusher. He really hasn't developed the way that the Colts were hoping that he was going to develop when they took him injured, in the draft that year. And again, we'll just have to kind of see what happens, but you kind of have two of the same type of defensive end right now. And I don't love that. I love having that kind of that power speed combo, and maybe Austin Booker becomes that guy, and this is all a moot point, but you're also putting a lot of value into the development of a 5th round pick, where usually 5th round edge rushers, I know everybody wants to bring up Max Crosby, but it's like 5th round edge rushers don't usually develop into like elite starters. So yeah, I mean, I guess the positive way of spinning this, talking about the interior defensive line, is the fact that Chris Williams is your 5th defensive tackle this year, which is great considering, they poached Mike Ford off the Packers practice squad.
Jonathan Ford.
Jonathan Ford. Sorry. Yeah. Mike Ford. I don't know why I said Mike Ford. Jonathan Ford off their practice squad halfway through the year, and he was immediately starting for them. So obviously depth's a lot better there. I'm really curious to see what Grady Jarrett has left, at least according to, what people saw in camp. It sounds like he's still got a lot of juice. Hopefully this is one of those situations where he comes in with a lot to prove and he has a massive year. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it from a pass rush standpoint, I think that there's a lot of questions, to put it lightly.
Yeah. I agree with you completely. I do think this defensive line is going to stop the run really well, because while I sit there and say that Dio and Sweat aren't the best pass rushing duo on the outside, I do think both of them will do pretty well against the run. We know Billings is great against the run. I think Jarrett and Dexter will absolutely be. So I do think that unit with Edmonds and Edwards behind them, I think the Bears will control the run well. But yeah, they do have a good secondary, but that secondary is going to have to be really sticky with I think it's going to be difficult to get that pass rush going. So Aaron, before we get into the mailbag, I want to do about 10 minutes of questions with some mailbag questions. Let's just do big picture here and expectations for the season. If you want to give a Vikings prediction, that's fine. I'm going to have another podcast prior to the Vikings game. This is just our big season preview. But for me, the floor here is 8 wins. If the floor is below 8 wins, something, Caleb Williams missed 10 games, like something disastrous happened as far as I'm concerned. I know the schedule isn't easy, but this really needs to be at least an 8-win team. I expect that they will be on the right side of 500 and have at least 9 wins. I think they have a shot at a 10. I think the ceiling's probably about 11. And I think the NFC North, I think you're going to see a division where last place might have 8 wins and first place might have 10 or 11 wins. I think you're going to see this really clustered together. I had someone tell me that he wouldn't even be shocked if like the entire unit, the entire division was like 8-7 through, 15 weeks kind of thing. Like he thinks it could be that clustered together, which would be, fantastic for content, but, a little nerve wracking for the fans. So for me, I'm not guaranteeing a playoff or anything, because I think the NFC is really depth in terms of those playoff caliber teams, not top heavy like the AFC is with the Ravens and Chiefs and Bills. You got the Eagles of that caliber, but you really don't have anyone else at that caliber. But I think those secondary teams, the Bucks, the Commanders, the Rams, if Stafford stays healthy, the 49ers, the entire NFC North, that those teams, it's going to be a real battle to get a playoff spot. I think the Bears are going to be there in December and early January battling for it. I don't know if they're going to get there. So my expectation is a winning season with a shot at the playoffs. They may or may not get in. But if they don't hit that point, if they don't get to at least there, then something terrible happened, and I don't know what it is.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I mean, for me, the floor of expectation is nine wins. I mean, because the thing is like we always do this with rebuilding teams. We're like, oh, well, if they're making incremental progress, it's like the Bears won 5 games, so if they win 8 games, that's good. And it's like, okay, but like when you really look at it, the teams that break out and become good teams usually go from really crappy one year to really good the next. Look at Washington. There's a multitude of different teams where that's happened. Usually when you see those middling teams like the Raiders and the Cowboys and different teams like that, where it's like they're constantly hovering around 8 or 9 wins, that's kind of where they stick, right? So I don't buy into that. I know I've seen some prominent Bears writers basically saying like, if they win 7 games, that's a successful season. No, it's not.
No.
Like,
oh no.
The way that they manage their offseason in terms of cap, the way that they attack things, their roster got older because of who they added, which is fine. Again, you got to do what you got to do. But like, this is not a team that is built to win 7 or 8 games and everybody's happy. This is a team that should in their minds win 9 to 10 games. And if they miss the playoffs, it's not because they had a losing record. It's because there was a clump of teams for that 7th seed and they just lost the tiebreaker or something along those lines. Kind of like Seattle last year, right? I think Seattle still won 9 games and they basically went into week 18 with virtually no chance of a playoff spot because of the tiebreaker situation. I could see something like that happening. But again, from an expectation standpoint, like 7 wins isn't good enough. 8 wins isn't good enough, in my opinion. Like they haven't had a season over 500 since 2018. Like that's absolutely ridiculous. Like that has to change.
Yeah, it absolutely has to. So we're going to wrap it up with the mailbag. For those of you listening on the podcast feed, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this. This is Bears Banter with Bill Zimmerman and Aaron Leming. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back into the podcast. Let's get through as many questions as we can here, Aaron. We'll try and keep our answers as brief as possible so we can get through as many here in about 10 minutes or so. Let's start with one from the chat. Antonio Esparza says, what would be a disaster season for Caleb in terms of stats? To me, I'll just answer this quickly. To me, it's the advanced stats. Like, I think Caleb's going to have, 3,500 to 4,000 yards. He's going to have touchdowns just from Ben Johnson's offense. But if we don't see that yards per attempt jump over 7, where it was like 6.3, completion percentage, I think it'll hit 65, 66. I don't know if it'll be 70. I think that'll be fine. But if we don't see that jump, Aaron, in the EPA and the yards per attempt, I'm going to have concerns about Caleb.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think anything below the above average mark, that like top 12, top 15 in a lot of the telling advanced metrics and numbers as a whole, and obviously looking the part as well. Like you want to see a guy that is exiting this season more confidently. I think in an ideal world, he's top 10, top 7, top 10 in most everything, and he kind of takes that next convincing step. But if you don't see that next convincing step as a whole, like the advanced metrics still need to be in the above average category, at least in my opinion.
All right, we'll do a quick one here from Almighty Man, who says thoughts on Bears releasing Duvernay. To me, Aaron, and you tell me if you disagree, this is just a procedural move. Certain guys hit waivers if you release them, and then any team can grab them. Certain vested veterans are just immediately free agents and have the ability to turn down other teams. So the Bears can tell, hey, Devin, we're going to cut you here. You're coming back in a couple days. We just need to kind of fix our cornerback room or run it, whatever room they're trying to fix. So I think it's procedural here, Almighty Man. I think he's still the Bears return guy. I wouldn't read anything into it.
Yeah, same thing.
All right. So let's move into some Twitter questions here. Let's start with Joe Tucio, Aaron. I'll let you answer this first. Do you think Poles makes any trades before week 1 or just does the waiver claims he did?
Honestly, at this point, I feel like if they were going to make any moves, it would have already happened. I think that they're kind of rolling into this, basically saying like this roster is what it is. If we need to make a move at the deadline, if we're in contention, then cool. But this is kind of where things are at. And I don't know that I particularly agree with it, but I also get it just from like a financial standpoint of how much cash that they've spent this year. Like they can move cap space around, but from a cash standpoint, a cash flow standpoint, they spent more money this year than in a long time. Because not only did they go crazy in free agency and make those trades, but they've also extended 5 guys as well, which obviously, when you're talking about cash in an escrow account for ownership that isn't crazy rich, that's a pretty big thing. So I don't expect anything crazy. I think if they're going to make any more moves, it would be more towards a deadline. But at this point, I don't even know a trade that they could make that would really help them out a ton. I mean, maybe I'm just lacking creativity here. What about you?
To me, it'd be like a veteran running back that it's, a Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne, Breece Hall. That's the type of move they could make if they wanted to. But I am with you. I don't know if they actually want to. So let's move to Ed Helinsky, Aaron. He asks, who or what surprised you about this year's cut down process? And I was just thinking about this. I really don't think anything. I mean, my 53-man roster projection was really close to being accurate. I was off by 1 or 2 guys. Carl Jones I didn't have, but I also didn't think there was going to be an injury to Amen. And I think that's the only reason that had happened there. I think it was pretty straightforward, how this 53 was going to lay out. So I didn't really have any surprises. Zach Pickens and Tyler Scott, I absolutely thought were going to be shown the door.
Yeah, I think in terms of like overall personnel, not a lot of surprises. I guess the only thing I would be I was a little surprised about is just the fact that they are carrying 3 running backs and only 1 on the practice squad. And again, I'm not even really championing for Ian Wheeler here. I'm just saying, like, I thought Ian Wheeler and Britton Brown would both be on the practice squad. Maybe they end up that way. I know there's still some shuffling to be done, but it definitely feels like the value that we have placed at running back all year, all offseason, has definitely not been a shared concern for them. So I think if anything, that would be the only real surprise. But again, that's kind of being more nitpicky than anything. I think this is actually one of the easier rosters to project. Like you said, outside of a few guys, I think I ended up getting like four total wrong, and some of that was injury related, and then some of that was simply not believing that they would keep a 6th receiver, and I'm glad they did. I mean, Jade Walker's on the roster. That's great.
Yeah, it's a great story. Let's go to Joe Barzak, who, again, we're just going to do some contract stuff and then, some 53-man stuff. Then we'll get into some of the questions about big picture. Why not restructure a contract like Sweat to clear up money to sign Zadarius Smith? Gives them a much better chance in 2025 to make a playoff run, and they can spend a high pick at edge next year to significantly improve the room. To me, Aaron, I mean, as far as I know, and actually I think I heard this from you, Zadarius Smith has been campaigning to try and get back to Detroit. Doesn't sound like he wants to be anywhere else. And maybe there's just some things that Ben Johnson knows about Smith from his time together with him, where he just doesn't think he's a fit on this roster.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of a two-level thing, right? I think with Zadarius Smith, if you listen to Ryan Poles talk yesterday, there was a question basically asking, like, have you thought about making another move at defensive end, blah, 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 blah. And his answer was very directed, in my opinion. It was basically something along the lines of, well, we don't want to add somebody to the room that's going to give us a boost right now, but as the season moves on is going to basically weigh on the locker room. And considering, the names out on the market and considering Ben Johnson's experience with Zadarius Smith last year, that felt very pointed in his direction. I think that the second level to this is that, yes, they could clear money. I think they are going to have to clear money in some way, shape, or form, just kind of looking at how things go, even if it's a few $1 million. Now, if it was me and I'm doing a restructure, I'm going to restructure DJ Moore because you're going to end up getting about $18 million. That's going to be free. What you could do with that, you can use a few million this year. You can move the rest into next year. Yes, it causes, I think it's basically like $4.5 million dead for the life of his contract over the next 4 years starting next year. But again, like if you save $18 million and let's say you use 6 of it this year to have a little bit of flexibility and you move 12 of that in the next year, you're covering next year's $4 million dead. And you're helping yourself in terms of looking at 2026 and the fact that things are going to be a lot tighter. So it wouldn't surprise me just from a more procedural aspect. A lot of teams that are tighter against the cap do it, but I don't know that that's like, even if they make a move like that, I wouldn't immediately jump to, oh my God, they're going to go out and sign Zadarius Smith. Oh my God, they're going to go out and make a trade and spend $10 million on a player. I think that they're just kind of getting to that point where procedurally they're going to have to start moving money around to be able to kind of save for next year and be able to, maneuver around for the year that they have right now.
All right, let's see if we can get in 3 more. Clayton Connis. Ben has said a few times this team is not playing well enough to win many games. Yesterday, he doubled down on how no one has stepped up at left tackle, yet Poles says he's so proud of the OL group. How do you think Ben's perception of Poles has changed from when he was first hired to now? Yeah, it's hard to gauge, Clayton. I'll just say quickly, I probably don't think it has. I think he took this job because I think he thinks he can work with Ryan Poles. And I'll go back to with Rick Smith, the interview I did after he hired him, Ben Johnson's agent, about GM alignment. And what that meant was alignment in terms of your vision, where Ben Johnson wants to put the team in his vision and a GM isn't so married to his own guys that he's not willing to part with them. So to me, that's where I think Ben Johnson sits there and says, it might be a 1A, 1B thing where Ben Johnson is 1A in terms of personnel, but they are definitely working together. I don't think there's any perception change or Ryan Poles has been extended. This is the group that's going to be here running this football team for a couple of years. I don't read anything into it.
Yeah, I don't either. And I think a lot of that just kind of comes down to how they handle the media, right? I mean, Ryan Poles has always been much more reserved and not nearly as open versus Ben Johnson, who, like, he's got a reputation to uphold the locker room, and him simply saying, like, these, all the false starts, all the pre-snap procedure penalties, the fact that no left tackle stuck out, like, he's being honest while also kind of putting it on his players, like, somebody needs to step up and do something. I didn't read a lot into it, but again, everything is perception. And I think that having 2 drastically opposite personalities as far as GM and head coach go can definitely do that, where everybody's going to take something different from it.
All right, how about Charlie Blanchard? He wants to know, will the offense be top half in the league this year? I say yes. If I see this after 17 games, they're 18 or 19, I'm going to be a little disappointed. I'm not saying they need to be 5 or 6, Aaron, but yeah, I'd like to see them at least, top half, 12th, 13th in the league.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think this kind of goes back to looking at the really good offensive minds taking over as head coaches, whether that's San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan, whether that's Sean McVay with Jared Goff. I think people forget how big of a disaster the Rams were before McVay took over and how good that offense got very quickly. So, yeah, I think the expectation should absolutely be, I would say, top 15. I mean, like you said, they don't need to be top 5. They probably don't even need to be top 10, but I think if they're a top 15 unit, especially with an average defense that can take the ball away, I mean, that should easily get them the 9 or 10 wins.
Yep. And last question from Ryan Schlanzer. I think Booker breaks out this year. Rush defense is his weakness, but he looks stronger this year already. Does he have the ability to work himself into the number 2 spot opposite Sweat, or will the rush defense always hold him back? Look, I mean, we're going to see it when Booker's out on the field. If, last year teams targeted Booker. He was out on the field. If they were running the football, they ran right at him. We'll see this year if that's still the case. Maybe Dennis Allen does a better job protecting Booker when he's out there in case that happens. But look, even if Dio stays the starter, if Booker's playing really well, Booker's going to start seeing more and more snaps. Sweat and Odengbo are going to start seeing less snaps. So I'm not too worried about who's starting. What I'd love to see is Austin Booker getting 60-70% of the snaps and getting kind of an equal amount as the other two, because that's going to mean he's playing really well off, stopping the run and stopping the pass.
Yeah, I think you're dead on that. I'm not really concerned about who's on the field on the first snap of the game. I'm more looking at snap counts, and I think if you look at Dennis Allen's defenses, especially in New Orleans, outside of Cam Jordan, there's been a lot of rotation. So there's going to be a heavy rotation, and I think that he's going to play the players that have the most productivity. And I think the other thing too, kind of going back to what he's talked about before, is you got Dio and you got Sweat that are two bigger bodies versus a guy like Austin Booker, who he called undersized. So I think that he's going to be more of a package rusher. And I think that because of his creativity, he'll be using those 5-man fronts. He'll be using creative ways to be able to get after the passer. But I don't think that they're going to put him in a position where he's going to compromise the run defense too much either. So I think there's room for both.
All right, let's wrap up the podcast. I'm going to save my Vikings prediction for my next podcast, but Aaron, I'm going to put you on the spot. If there's anything we didn't hit, I can't think of anything we might have missed. If there's anything we didn't hit and you want to have a final thought on that, go ahead. Otherwise, Bears, Vikings, Monday Night Football here in less than 2 weeks. Who do you got?
Yeah, no, I don't think we missed anything. Yeah. It's funny because I haven't actually put, as weird as it sounds, I haven't put a ton of thought into the game yet. Just because there's so many floating pieces on both sides of the ball. I don't think I'm going to give you a score. What I will say is my gut feeling as of Wednesday, the 27th of August, I still feel like the Bears are going to come out and I think they're going to win the game. I think that Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson's history against Brian Flores definitely works in their favor. And I also think that Dennis Allen's history against young and or rookie quarterbacks, which is basically what McCarthy is at this point, also works in their favor. I'm sure it's going to be one of those back and forth games, but I'm going to go ahead and say that the Bears will win that one at home and kind of get off to the right start under Ben Johnson, and the hype train goes crazy, especially with all the national media, with that being a Monday night game.
Yeah, and I think you hit on the big point that really I'm going to focus on too, is J.J. McCarthy's basically a rookie. This is his first start ever with that against Dennis Allen. I think, it's going to be a tough place for J.J. McCarthy to come in and win that football game. So, Aaron, thank you for so much time. I really appreciate it. This is a great tradition, and I look forward to doing it about a year from now.
Absolutely. Hopefully we're talking about a Super Bowl contender next year. So
yeah.
Always appreciate you having me on, man.
Well, let's cross our fingers that that's the case. That's going to do it for Bears Banter. Thank you for all 2,000 plus of you who joined. That was great. Thank you, Aaron. Bear down, everybody. We'll talk to you next week. Adios.